Well, it's Tuesday.
It is.
And we're back in the attic again.
We are.
Back in the attic again. Anyway, we want to really go clomping way back down memory lane for a while, because I've been thinking about delving into a difficult subject, actually, for modelers, because it's an Italian company. When you say Italian, you have to do this. It's an Italian company, but one of the biggest model building companies in the world, and best known probably for their trains, but they've made everything in the world, from automobiles to cannons and brass models and just all kinds of stuff, stuff. But a lot of people from the 1960s don't know them. The name is Rivarossi. Rivarossi. And there's several companies that spun off of those, most notably Poacher.
Oh, okay.
Poacher. And so,
Poacher, I recognize.
Who made automobiles and cannon kits. And there were some other spin-offs and some other associations and some really weird history. And the company still exists. And the spin-off companies, Poacher exists in a whole new variation and so on. But massive company with massive offerings. And but back in the 60s and late 50s, they started offering American prototype. They were best known for their Italian, you always have to do that when you say Italian prototype models of trains and whatnot, mostly trains. HO scale and OO scale and those kinds of things, depending on European prototype or American prototype or whatever kind of. It's very similar scales, OO and HO. But they rolled out a whole bunch of really interesting American offerings way back in the 1960s, and then didn't actually offer them under their own name, and who knows what the legalities and all of that. But they created an import company, which was a separate company called AHM, Associated Hobby Manufacturers. And so this stuff was all offered as AHM models. And they were more expensive than the average American made, but they did such neat engines. I've got one that's on the loose. Most of our AHM models are on the loose. I bought a lot of this stuff when 1962, 1963 and stuff. Didn't run all that well. That was maybe my principal complaint, and even as a kid I'd try to remotor these and make them run a little bit better. But the detail
it's amazing.
was just fairly phenomenal for just
that
a plastic ready-to-run locomotive.
Wow.
This was one of their most famous offerings, an Indiana Harbor Belt switcher. It doesn't look much like a switcher. There's a tender. It's on the loose around here somewhere.
Oh.
You've gone through and organized a lot of this stuff.
It should be in a labeled box.
Yeah,
Martha
this
Stewart.
was in a labeled box, but the tender's not with it, and it maybe there's still some unopened boxes of loose stuff that needs to be addressed.
It's over there.
But you've been going through unboxing and labeling and organizing and we're actually getting a sense of where all of this kind of stuff is. The stuff was fairly expensive.
Yes.
And more expensive than its American American counterparts for the American prototype engines, Tyco and Bachmann, and this was kind of in that same category, and yet it's kind of not. Way better detail, much nicer looking engines, and way more expensive.
Imagine.
But this neat little Indiana Harbor Belt, it doesn't look like a switcher because it's so big, but you'll notice no trailing wheels, no lead wheels, 4 axles, so it's an 080 switcher off the Indiana Harbor Belt, engine number 102, and just such a beautiful little engine.
That's just amazing.
Everybody wanted this little guy. Yeah. And they offered a whole bunch going clear back. Here's another one of their offerings. They did a whole bunch of early engines off the Virginia and Truckee. We loved the Virginia and
Yes,
Truckee.
lots of good memories there.
Yeah, and up at Carson City
Oh,
and
fun. Yes.
Virginia City
Absolutely.
and the Nevada State Railroad Museum. But because so many of the Virginia and Truckee engines survived, and a lot of them are very similar because they're just Baldwin engines,
Right.
that Rivarossi decided to offer a whole bunch, almost all of the surviving engines, not all of the surviving engines. This one is the most unique of those.
Oh, wow.
This is the Bolker.
Isn't it neat?
The Bolker. And the
Yeah.
Bolker is currently unrestored and not really on display, but stored at the California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento. And we've
Sacramento.
seen it, but
We have.
you sort of have to peer through the dark shadows and stuff because it's
Right.
inside of a shed. The Bolker had the most interesting history. It started off as a little 440 switcher with a tender and everything. It always had this configuration. Didn't work out as a switcher, so the Virginia and Truckee decided to convert it into a road engine, and they added some pilot wheels here so it wouldn't derail going down the main line at speed. That didn't work out that well. So of all things, they painted it bright red and converted it into a fire engine.
Oh, wow.
So this apparatus up here is a water pump, and it steals water from the tender and pressurizes it here, and then they had a trailing car. If anything out on the line caught fire, they could dispatch the Bolker as a fire engine
Oh, neat.
and go put that out. But the motor's here in the tender, and there's a drive line that connects it here. Again, like a lot of these Rivarossis, just didn't run that well. But boy, is it pretty.
That's neat. It's just cool.
And I set about as a young person to try to buy all of the Virginia and Truckee engines that they did, and really all of that first generation of
Right.
engines.
Yes.
That AHM, in other words, Rivarossi, actually did.
Neat.
But how beautiful
That is so
is
cool.
that little
That
engine?
is so
These things are readily available. They made so many of them. They're all over eBay and
Right.
popping up used all over the place. Brand new, I think this guy sold for about $50. It was an expensive little engine, but and probably could be picked up for around that same amount of money today on eBay, depending on the condition. If you found one that actually ran and ran well, somebody maybe remotored and did some things with, you'd probably pay more than that for it. Because they really are
just
well
really, yeah,
done,
the
really
detail.
gorgeous. And if you took a little time and actually put a working headlight and maybe even a sound system, if you remotored it, this is almost all open frame motor in the tender. But if you remotored it, you could probably fit all kinds of electronics and sound and
I'd be tempted to put real wood in the tender.
that wood load doesn't look terribly good.
Right.
So
Next
you
time
could
I trim trees.
you could have a lot of fun with this little guy. But they did several 440s. They did the Genoa or Genoa, depending on which pronunciation you want to use. The Reno,
Yes.
the Enyo, all Virginia and Truckee engines from about 1880, 1890, that period on the Virginia and Truckee. And they did the passenger cars and freight cars and everything. We used to refer to this as Italian brass.
Italian brass.
Italian brass. It wasn't as expensive as a brass engine, but it was way more expensive than the usual Bachmann or Tyco engine.
Yeah.
But they were so much more beautiful, and then you just fought like crazy to try to get them to actually run correctly for you and put up with their idiosyncrasies and tried to keep them running. When you first bought them, they ran just fine.
Really?
Yeah, but sometimes they die within 2 days. And I shouldn't say die, but just start getting bindy and weird and
Oh,
lurchy.
wow.
And you'd go in there and you'd want to try to lubricate some things and fix some things up. And the best thing to do was remotor them, because the open frame motors, they had the brushes arced so bad, that was usually what started to kill it, was
Yeah.
all kinds of crud and oxidation and
oxidation.
smoke and stuff
Smoke
forming
will
on the commentator brushes thing deal armature of the open frame motor.
And you never want to have
and
that
like
happen.
I say, this whole tender is full of open frame motors. So. Anyway, there it is. Rivarossi. We're going to do some messing around with Rivarossi over the
sure.
next few weeks, and
Yeah.
then change off to their associated company, Poacher.
Poacher.
Very loosely associated. One of the executives at AHM, not AHM, but Rivarossi, same company,
Yes.
decided he wanted to do 8-scale automobiles and cannons, and just split away and went off and did that with their blessing, and continued marketing those under the AHM moniker, but they were manufactured by a different company, in this case Poacher, but in the stores it all looked the same. It said AHM.
Okay.
Anyway, so a lot of weird and complicated history,
Yeah.
and all of it Italian. Okay, remember to do this when you say Italian. Well, if you haven't been over to the channel, pop over to the channel and watch the other 300 almost movies that are over there, and binge watch for a while. It's always a good deal of fun.
Pop
But mostly
popcorn.
you want to make sure you subscribe. And to subscribe, you click on the newfangled round blue button. You ready?
Yes, here we are.
Zoink! That big blue button right there. Well, we're not sure how you found this movie on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring. And we will see you here again on Sunday as we drive around a bit. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.